I am so excited for our next guest. She is in her words, dialect coach for TV and film and speech, and communication coach for politicians, entrepreneurs, and for anybody who's interested in using their voice to get what they want. You are also a huge advocate for women, and I'm so happy to have you on the show. Thank you, Samara Bay, for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
I have so many questions for you, but I want the listeners to get to know you a little bit more. So whatever you feel comfortable sharing of your story and how you got here.
Yeah. Well, hi, everybody. I'm glad to be here. I have this really cool career in Hollywood where I coach actors on accents. So that means movie stars with foreign accents who need to sound American or Canadian actors who need to sound very regional specific for a role. It's a really cool job. And around 2018, for totally obvious political reasons having to do with where the country was at that point and the upcoming midterms, I was really interested in activism and specifically in trying to use my skill set to help the cause. And MoveOn.org found me. And among a few other coaches that they were kind of collecting, and asked if I'd be interested in helping women who are running for office for the first time. It was basically exclusively women, which was just MoveOn's, that was what was happening in 2018. There's a whole bunch of first-time female candidates for office. And you know what? When you are a woman and you decide, fuck it, I'm gonna run for office, you're usually doing it because you have amazing drive, fire, ideals, but not necessarily public speaking experience. Mm-hmm. And any woman who has been in a position where they have to sort of scale up their life, get on a big stage, whatever, shit comes up. And some of that stuff that comes up is like, I don't want to tell my story because it's boring, or I'm taking up too much space, or I'm promoting myself and it feels icky. I'm just here for you, not for me. These little inner demons come up, and I'm very interested in that. And I started working with women that year, and it turned into a completely, I was going to say different career, but honestly, like kind of a calling. And although I still dialect coach, this has really taken over my life, and it resulted in a podcast and in a book that's now coming out in 8 months with Crown, which is a division of Penguin Random House. And what I realized is that a number of things, but one of the things I realized is that the more I worked with women, and honestly, people for whom English is their second language, immigrants, people who have, as linguists would say, accents that aren't marked for class or race, right? These really loaded phrases to mean that when we talk non-standard, and who makes up the standards, people judge us as maybe not deserving of power. And those people can also be us. We can also be judging us. And this stuff runs deep. And I realized, especially because I'm sort of a pop linguist too, like I've always been interested in linguistics and the intersection of linguistics and society. Questions arise around like, what are those biases? What are those standards? Why do we listen to certain people and we go, oh, I believe them, I trust them. We listen to other people and we go, they have to earn it, or I'm going to dismiss them, or they clearly don't sound quote unquote educated, right? There are so many biases laden in there, and we're pretty much all guilty of it according to linguists, and it's sort of liberating to just know that. Among all the internalized biases we've all picked up, and that us good folks in 2022 America are trying to examine and check and get better at. One of them that no one talks about, and so it became kind of my thing, is voice bias. So now I just sort of stand here at the intersection of voice and power, waving a flag and saying, come join me in the revolution.
I love this. And by the way, I'm going to flex for you, but one of your actor clients is Gal Gadot. Is it Gadot or Gadot?
It's Gal Gadot, but if you're Israeli like her, it's Gal Gadot. Gadot.
Yes.
But yes, Gal Gadot. In fact, this is a thank you card from her right there.
Oh my gosh, I can't. I'm fangirling. I love Wonder Woman. It was like one of the only was it Marvel or DC comic?
DC.
Okay. I'm not really into those types of movies, but I was
Yeah.
in the theater 3 times for Wonder Woman.
Yeah, I've had some really incredible clients, and I have to say, this is not about Gal specifically, but the more women in power, in that kind of power that I have
Yes.
worked with,
Yeah.
even in straight up in the performance realm, the more I have been interested in power. Because I will say this anonymous story about somebody that is not Gal truly, but I worked with another famous actress who only signed on to a project because, or not only signed on, but she only agreed to sign on under the condition that a woman at a certain point would take a pass at this script because it had a lot of dick jokes, let's be honest. And they said yes. She signed on. She requested. It sort of weirdly never happened. She requested a second time. It weirdly sort of never happened. And then we were working together and I was like, so what's the deal? What do you, I mean, these jokes are still not totally working. And she said, I did 2 asks. If I do one more, I'm going to be difficult.
Wow.
And I'm like, there's more you learn from working with movie stars than the work itself. There's a whole lot about how to navigate power, even when you seemingly from the outside have all of it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I was so excited to sell this book. It happened at the top of the pandemic, literally March of 2020. And it ended up being a 13-way bidding war. And we were like 2 weeks in to COVID. And I was like, who cares about women's voices? Like, let me just take a second to mourn the loss of this project. And then the publishers came out. And I think the fact that I talk about voice through a social justice lens is just sort of fresh and new enough that people were interested and knew it was a big deal. But also, there is sort of a fun component here because like all of us actually have voice drama. Like if you were listening and you don't, that is wonderful. But from the clients I've had and the workshops I've done in corporate context, in political context, in women's empowerment, like conference spaces, in the startup world, and among high schoolers, the same stuff comes up. And one of the things that I offer is this idea of your voice story. So I just made up this term to sort of capture the spirit of like how each of us has an interesting relationship to our own voice. Some might say it's sort of a toxic relationship to our own voice. Most of us have, from what my experience, have little inner, messaging along the lines of, I use like too much. Somebody once told me that my voice is annoying and I don't believe them, but like I kind of do. I have a lot of trouble getting heard in a work context, and I'm pretty sure it's them and I'm pretty sure it's patriarchy, but like, again, what if it's me? A billion variations of this. And I've collected these stories from, people who their parents were immigrants, but they sounded American growing up. And so there's like weird shame and cultural, confusion around that. Or they grew up in a household where yelling was not allowed. So now if they raise their voice, they feel really uncomfortable. Or they were the youngest child of 5, or the English teacher in high school said, is a direct quote, "Are you trying to sound stupid on purpose?" And now she's in her 30s and she's like, every time I open my mouth, I wonder if that's what people are thinking. And I don't know how to change it because no one ever offered me a solution or a suggestion, merely a response to how I apparently present. So the idea of a voice story is that it's the collection of these little tiny kind of dings we've gotten our whole life, plus all the media messaging, when Hillary ran for office and she was quote unquote shrill, like we don't know what to do with any of this stuff. So it gets internalized. And then we're like, I don't love public speaking. Yeah, I can't imagine why not.
Yeah, it's just so there's so many things to be said on that. One, the hypocrisy of women being judged for their voice and men not in certain situations, right? Like I know that I have bias towards different accents right? There are some that I do not feel safe with. I innately don't trust. There are some that I feel like that person is maybe smarter. And that's just bias. That's not something that I'm trying to come up with. And to be honest, I never even really thought about it until I found you and started kind of listening to your work and what you've been talking about. So can we talk about that for a second? Like what is typical bias within dating and how does that affect finding a partner or first dates? Like, how does that come into play?
It's so interesting. I mean, all of us, here's one way to answer that question. All of us have a voice that is a result of our life experience. And I don't just mean where we were born and raised and what our parents sounded like, although obviously that plays a role. But then there's all these other things that have to do with our life choices since then. When did we leave and why? And were we trying to run away from home, or were we trying to find something that felt like it was coherent with the, upbringing we had? What did we learn when we went off to, say, college, right? Or some sort of, away from home experience? What did we learn about like what being taken seriously sounds like? And how did we maybe adjust in order to be taken seriously? What did we learn about what flirting works on us and what flirting doesn't work on us? And we got called a, whatever, fill in the blank.
Mm-hmm.
What did we learn about what makes people laugh and find us charming? Because linguists will say, and it's one of my favorite things about linguistics, nobody has picked up any habits that didn't mean something to them. We've picked up every habit we have for a reason. And that means if we say like a lot, it's because probably our friends do. And we are mirroring the people we love.
Right.
Or when you say like, you sound a little less aggressive or assertive, which some people can't tell the difference between. And it helps to get what we want. I mean, often I'm curious about, well, what does it take to get what we want in certain circumstances? I mean, like, there's a lot of common wisdom, quote unquote, that the more direct we are, the better. But I don't think that most people who aren't rich, straight white men would agree with that.
Right.
We can certainly experiment with it. And I hope we live in a world where we can be direct when we want to be. But we've all, according to linguists, found ways to be non-direct in order to actually get what we want. To actually get heard, to actually be unintimidating enough to be, considered charming, and thus have our, somewhat difficult conversation actually be understood and appreciated, whatever. So when we think about our voices this way, we realize that we really are the result of every aspect of our life, not just where we grew up, but every single choice and every single thing that wasn't our choice since then, and what we did to accommodate. And so if we end up in a first date situation with somebody who doesn't sound like us, I like to use the phrase generous ears. What can we do? What can we do to, notice some of those biases? Oh, this person is very unlike me. Oh, this person I feel like maybe doesn't have an education. This person, notice them and go, am I in a position right here to listen with more generous ears to the life that this person's actually led? If I want to, because the alternative is date somebody just like you.
Right. Yeah.
But, I think / hope that we are, you and me and those of us who are listening in, are living in actively encouraging a world with more diversity. And that doesn't just mean skin color. It also means life experience. And that will be reflected in your voice.
Right. Yeah, I think, and I really like that term generous ears, because I think that can go even further to like generous, like hearts, right? Of like not judging someone right away, even from a first date. I know I've counted so many people off within 2 minutes of meeting. And sometimes it's just my gut, and I listen to my gut, and my gut was right.
This is such a good point, right? Because like, what's gut and what's bias?
Yes.
There's no way. I am not the person to say, here's the answer. But I am the person to say, be really curious about that. Because if it's your gut, and your gut is saying, this person doesn't make me feel safe, or this person reminds me way too much of my bad habit of who I tend to date. Okay, take a breath. Listen to that. Honor that like your time is valuable. You don't need to waste it learning the same fucking lesson all over again.
Right.
But take a second also in that process. This is where the curiosity part comes in, and say, is it something that is my gut saying, I need some distance? Or is it just my habit saying this is me?
I heard you say in one of your conversations, I think it was actually on a different podcast, but you were saying that when women feel unsafe, our pitch goes higher. And when men feel unsafe, their pitch goes lower. And it's interesting I have bias even thinking of men feeling unsafe. you know,
I think actually, I think an easier word to use is uncomfortable.
Sure.
It isn't necessarily about physical safety, but certainly uncomfortable as in, I could be vulnerable.
Right.
Fuck. Vulnerability alert. Someone could be seeing me for real.
Yeah.
For any of us, regardless of gender. And then, I mean, again, if you don't fit this, wonderful. And obviously this gendered stuff, it feels very binary, and we are trying to live in a much less binary world now. But it is interesting to notice that a lot of this linguistic stuff does fall under gender lines because it's the world we live in. So if we're being, curious about this stuff, it is an interesting place to observe ourselves as well. When women aren't uncomfortable, or I'll just say that, to be super clean, when women are uncomfortable, we tend to go up in pitch, and then we end up sounding really nice. And I call it our Starbucks voice because it's also our customer service voice, which isn't about discomfort, but it is about like, is there anything I can do for you? Because I don't have any needs of my own. So don't worry, I'm not going to be in any way high maintenance. And then men, stereotypically, do the opposite. Also, similarly kind of monotone. Like I didn't do a whole lot of up and down once I was up there. It was just this like, I'm just right here, and then this is where I'm going to be. So men will do the same thing, going down, pressing on their vocal cords and getting a lower than their usual sound, but also staying a bit monotone. And then you end up with this classic like bro posture of like, oh no, dude, totally, no, everything's good, no, totally, I'm totally cool, no, like don't worry.
Right. Yeah. I can like imagine so many situations that has happened.
Right. And then, I mean, I have come over the years of working with people to call that superhero voice. It's got like a little Batman quality, like, oh, no, I'm good. Everything's good.
Yeah.
So then we have this like horrible dichotomy where women go to Starbucks voice and like customer service, and men go to superhero. Nothing phases me. But like, if we think about the culture we live in, that's a safe spot to go. Both of those, really safe haven.
Yeah. It makes me think of, and I know I'm going to say 99% of the women listening to this will relate to this, but so many times including today, like in terms of like my life right now, the amount of times that I fake laugh, fake smile, say something nice back, don't respond to innuendo, just to make sure that I can leave the situation without being harassed, without being called a bitch, without any problems, is unreal. Like it's absolutely fucking disgusting. And something that I've been working on is being more direct, because I was taught, women were taught not to be. We're taught to be nice and to cater to men. And it's interesting in that, actually, okay, before I move on, I want you to speak on that first. Like what are, when I say that, like, what are your thoughts that come to mind with just that? It's just something we deal with all the time. Uh-oh, I lost you. you are. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, there you are.
Are we
Okay.
back?
Yes.
Oh my God.
What did you last hear?
You said, actually, wait, I should let you respond to that first.
Okay, yes. So what are your thoughts with that, of like women constantly having to deal with that? Is
Yeah.
that something like that we kind of have to continue to do for our safety, or should we try and work on being more direct? I don't know. It feels like being stuck between a rock and a hard place.
I have a lot of thoughts, and I am also, as a coach, a super realist. So I'm an idealist. I'm always heading toward us. I mean, to the extent people would like to follow me or walk with me, I'm heading us towards a better future in my mind. But also, I think it's very irresponsible as a coach to say, ignore the signs, just be authentic, right? So what you're pointing out is that there are rooms where we get to practice and rooms where we don't.
Yeah.
And we get to acknowledge the privilege or the power that we have in certain spaces. And perhaps, if we have some, spend it. So by that, I mean, if we are in a space where we are in a power position, if we have proven ourselves, if we are not worried about getting fired or getting harassed or getting hurt, what can we do? We are putting ourselves in a leadership position if we think about it that way.
Mm-hmm.
What can we do to model? What can we do for that 16-year-old who is maybe not in the room, but like needs us to do that now? And I even extend that to, like, if you are in a work or a conference or a social space and there's a question and answer period and you raise your hand to ask a question, you can think of that as leadership. In that moment, when all the eyes are on you, how do you want the future of leadership to sound? If you want it to sound like you, if you want it to sound unabashedly female, not lowering your voice to try to sound masculine, if you want it to sound unabashedly like someone who uses like or who swears, right? You may have noticed I have decided to embrace both of those things. And I'm at the beginning stages of a 8-month lead up to my book coming out, which one might call a, campaign. And it is important to me that I show up as me in these spaces, partly because it's modeling, partly because it's more joyful.
Yeah.
The problem with public speaking coaching, and I'm using that phrase really broadly to mean any way that any of us have ever been told, here's how to show up in a big moment. In corporate context, it's often called executive presence coaching. The problem with all of that is that it is almost always taught in a manner where they're basically saying, keep your voice low if it's too high, keep it steady if it tends to wave up and down and show emotional range. Talk at 70% your regular pace, so be really measured. Those rules are just based on what power has traditionally sounded like for thousands of years since ancient Greece, which is also masculine and in most of the Western world, straight and white and rich.
Yeah.
And nothing against any single individual who fits any of those criteria, but I will say that when I hear people, I'm just going to say it. When I hear people like our former Vice President, Mike Pence, if you remember that amazing VP debate with him and Kamala when the fly landed on his head.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that was one of my favorite debates ever.
Right. It's so crazy. I think of him all the time as the example of the perversion of that standard that we're all told to match. Whether we're told literally or we're just picking up the messages.
Right.
He is a prime example of somebody who fits every one of those check mark, voice is low, no emotional range, steady, doesn't say doesn't have vocal fry. Great. Did you trust him?
No.
I didn't. And even if he was a good guy,
right,
I wouldn't trust him because that does not engender trust. When we don't know, I mean, you can hear me right now. This is me being very naturally and organically pissed. And this voice is what happens when I allow myself
right,
to be emotionally invested in what I'm saying. And it also engenders trust.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know what your question was, but there's my answer. No. I do know what your question was, which is really like, how do we navigate? And I will say this, when I started teaching workshops on this, before I sold the book, the workshop title that I came up with on a whim, because it just felt really ballsy, but honestly, it drives people to show up because, oh my God, we all have this question, is how do you use your voice to get what you want?
Mm-hmm.
But there's like a big old asterisk around the word want, because, and this really ties into what you're asking, like the sort of, how do we navigate weird spaces and which version of ourselves, and where do we get to experiment with like, not with like letting go of the mental load
Mm-hmm.
you described? And the answer is, what do we actually want on a day-to-day or meeting by meeting basis? Because if what we want in a job interview at all costs is to get that job, that's useful to know. No shame, no shame.
Right.
But if what we want is to get that job, because if we get that job, we'll finally have the money to pay off our thing, to help out our brother, to, you know, fine, do what we must in that space, but do it on purpose.
Yeah.
And if our goal is not that, if our goal is, I want to feel like I am in integrity with myself, I have not negotiated away any part of my identity that I love, and I want to be able to look in the mirror at the end of the day and say, I stood up for myself today, consequences be damned, no shame in that either. But we get to decide, and it's not like a lifetime decision. It really is like a minute to minute or meeting by meeting or whatever dynamic to whatever dynamic decision. What do I want out of this?
Mm-hmm.
Is this one of the ones where I get to practice this thing where I'm like, fuck it. I'm not gonna hide. I'm gonna show up as real me.
Mm-hmm.
And especially if we're in a situation where we do have some privilege to spend, then like, cool. Let's just push the boundary and it'll be a little braver on this meeting and see how it goes and pick up some data and do something with it.
Right.
Or this date, you know, I mean, I talk a lot about work context, but obviously this is also partly it's the first half that we were talking about generous ears, but the other half is also like, which version of us is showing up? Is it somebody that is actually fall in love with the role?
Right.
By which I really mean honest, trustworthy.
It's interesting. I wanted to give you like a specific example. I'm sure you know all of these things, but I personally went through something. And then the reason I bring this up is because I had a friend who's kind of newly back into dating who had this experience, and she shared it with me. And I kind of shared back with her that it was a bit of a scary situation that she didn't even realize she was in. But it was a situation where the guy wasn't really listening to her and kept asking for more time. Well, just let's do, this, just make out for 5 more minutes, or like, I just don't want to go yet. Like, just do, and I've been in that situation too, where like I was ready to go, but the guy had to bring me home, and he kept being like, come on, just do 5 more minutes. And I was in a situation where like, I'm like, okay, I can either tell him to F off and call an Uber. And what if that doesn't go well? There's no one around. Or I can just make out with him for 5 more minutes, appease him, get in the car, which I did. And then I drove home and took a deep breath. And my friend was fine. And I kind of talked with her, and she realized the next day, like, it didn't sit well, but it fucking pisses me off that men do not understand the power they have over us, that they think that they're hearing us and that they are like, no means no, and all of this shit, but that this goes on, and that we as women have to even make the choice of, well, what do we want out of this? And sometimes what we want out of it is simply to just feel safe.
Yeah. Just literally stay alive.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, let's take a moment for that. Cause yeah, for sure. I mean, there's two like ways to go with this. One has nothing to do with my, expertise, but just as a friend, just in terms of making sure that we can set up situations where we have some sort of an escape route, or vet them enough by the time that we're in private with them, you know. But from the standpoint of my actual, you know, speech expertise, I will say that one of the most useful tools is something that can inspire resentment when I first mention it. So just sit with that and continue listening for a moment. But there's a huge amount of data to suggest that women get listened to a lot better when they blend two separate things together. So one is strength and the other is warmth. And if you want to think of these as dials, they're two separate dials. They're not opposites, two totally separate dials. And the strength dial, we can come across as really strong or really incompetent or weak, or I don't know what I'm talking about, you know, this sort of thing. And the warmth dial is from cold, where you're really closed off, to warm, where you're really bringing in I'm taking care of you energy. So all the data suggests, as does the existence of Oprah Winfrey, that when we can blend the two perfectly, when they're both at 10 or even they're both at 5, but that they kind of match our strength and our warmth, we get what we want at a much higher rate. And often in situations like that, we go one or the other. No shame, no victim blaming here, but it is interesting if we are noticing our own patterns as I talk about this, to sort of think, well, what would it take to shift those dials a little bit in that situation for my safety's sake? So if we're coming across as really strong and really not warm, that's likely, I mean, we can both fill in the blank, likely going to trigger some sort of ego response that is actually going to be a bit scary. If, on the other hand, we want to stay just that strong, I actually really do need to go home now, but we bring as much warmth as we can so that we are taking care of him at the same time. Again, this is where your resentment is welcome to come out and go, fuck that, but just sit with it for a sec, right? So if we're taking care of him just as much, I have to go. I have so enjoyed this, but I absolutely have to go. Thank you, right? It will get better heard. And this has been talked about for eons with women in power in terms of smile more. But I think that that's really misses the point. The real point is, what capacity do we have inside of us to love on somebody, to take care of somebody? And in this case, it's somebody who doesn't fucking deserve it.
Yeah.
And so we get to go home and primal scream to our friends, which is what you did, right? You and your friend, and go, this sucks. But this is obviously, ideally, only reserved for these absolutely shitty situations that we hope are not that frequent. But if what we're talking about, if what we want, quote unquote, in this scenario is to get out safe, dial up your warmth, dial up your warmth. And don't worry about that strength. Dial up that strength too. I'm not saying dial down the strength.
Right.
And, you know, sleep with them. You know, I am saying ask for what you want, but also do it in this way. It's, by the way, this is the same thing that works for interrupting people. Oh, I actually still have a little bit more to say. You know, for those of you who are just listening, I just did a big old smile. It's not because I thought to myself, smile more. It's because I thought to myself, take care of them. Oh, you accidentally interrupted, but actually I just have a little bit more to say, right? Strength and warmth, strength and warmth.
That is I hate that, but I also love that. I mean, I hate and love it. I mean, what are you going to do? You know,
here's the thing. Does that dude deserve it? No. But does your best friend deserve it? Yes. Does your kid deserve it? Yes. Do you deserve it? Yes. We actually all want to be talked about, I think, after we're gone, as somebody who is strong and warm.
Right.
Who was sure of their convictions and also took the fuck care of people, who nurtured the heck out of the people around them. Yeah. So these are actually inherently wonderful. It's just that when we have to use them on people who don't quite deserve it, it feels either manipulative or resentment inducing. And that's just because it's a tool that we're using in a shitty situation in order to get out alive.
What are some, do you have any other like key clear-cut phrases that women can say to men when they aren't interested, or they want to move on, or they don't want to talk to them anymore? Like, do you have anything specific that we can have in our back pocket?
I'm laughing because back in my dating days, in New York City, doing a lot of online dating. I remember a line I used a lot that before I was doing this work was totally strength and warmth mixing, and it really worked. So I obviously offer it not out of my expertise, but just out of my experience. And it was after a first date when somebody would want a second date, and I'd be like, we gotta shut this down now.
Yeah.
I would say, you are so lovely, but we're just not a match. With that warmth that suggests you were just about to figure it out too. I just happened to figure it out before you, which is really ego saving.
Right. I love that. What about like if you're in a bar and someone's come over to talk to you and you just don't want to talk to them anymore?
I mean, I will say the first thought that went through my mind is I don't want to talk to you anymore. Look, if you are with friends in a public space, you might as well just decide that means I'm in a power position. Sometimes we accidentally regress to some version of ourselves that felt like, she doesn't have power. But what if we do? What if we were actually the boss in that situation and a lowly assistant came up and started chatting us up? Mm-hmm. I'm not available right now. I'm not free to talk.
Yeah.
Oh, you're so sweet. No, thanks.
You make it sound so easy.
Oh, look, this situation, we can practice it though. And I will say this. I mean, something that I talk about with people when they're about to, when they're preparing, when they're like interested in how do I get ready? Like anxiety hits, and this is maybe for public speaking, but really maybe for this situation too, either before a date or when you're about to go to a bar and you just are like, who's gonna, come up to me now, and what awkward situation am I gonna have to get out of? One of my favorite suggestions, which actually comes from Presence, the Amy Cuddy books, the woman who made that TED talk about power posing. There's deep in the book, something that didn't make it into the TED talk, but she's a psychologist, so she has all this data, is this idea of priming for power. So in a nutshell, what we think about the moment before something big affects whether or not we hit that moment with power or with a sense of powerlessness. And it's kind of a cool thought experiment. Like, even if right now you hear me and you're like, yeah, fucking right. Like, try it, because our brains are pretty powerful. And here's what I know from experience. If we take a moment before we are about to do something that's a big deal, whether it's a date or a professional thing, or even just in the moment when somebody is annoying the heck out of us in a professional, in a bar context. Mm-hmm. Take a moment and think about, there's a few things to think about if you want to pick and choose here. Think about a moment when someone you admired you back, or gave you a compliment, or sent you an email where you just felt really seen. Just breathe in that memory. It doesn't quite work to just remember it and then have like some mean inner voice be like, whatever, what does that have to do with? No, you have to breathe in that memory. Like, oh, God, that was so great. Right? And like, let your body glow a little, let yourself glow a little bit with whatever that memory invokes. Another version of this is just to think about somebody who absolutely loves you. And when they look at you, they shine that love on you, and just close your eyes and remember them looking at you, and just breathe that in. But get yourself to a point where you remember yourself. Mm-hmm. You remember yourself at your greatest in someone else's eyes. If you are in a not nice to yourself moment, in someone else's eyes, where they just valued the F out of you. And you're like, okay, thank you for remembering me. And then see what happens in that next exchange. Because if you come from that place, you really will discover a version of yourself that's like, I'm good, thanks. I'm cool. Yeah. I have my friends back there. I'm not interested in this right now, thanks.
Yeah.
Which is just a different place to come from than when you are priming yourself for powerlessness. I'm uncomfortable here. I don't think I look cute tonight. All men suck. Whatever, like fill in the blank thing. Some people call this victim mode, right? It's not necessarily a fair way to talk about it, but if we notice that we're kind of sliding into victim mode, what can we think about to prime ourselves for power, to prime ourselves for the permission to say something real and kind, but no.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is very powerful. I I want to read a quote that you said. So you said, no one has ever pointed out to these men their male privilege and that they were kind of a buzzkill, or that you were kind of a buzzkill for not being able to take a joke. I don't think I read that correctly.
Wait, I don't think I ever said that. Where did I say
You
that?
said that. You said that on an interview
Ooh.
with, I'll have to look it up, but it was two women. It was on the podcast. Don't tell what your mom won't tell you.
Oh yeah. Oh my God. That was like 2 years ago. Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Tell me what I said again.
Okay. Let me read it. Okay. Let me read it again. Let me grab my bearings. Okay. So no one has ever pointed out to these men their male privilege. So what you were speaking on is you were talking about a work situation where I think it was some kind of actress you were working with felt uncomfortable and she felt like she couldn't speak up, and you spoke up and you were on set and you said something that threw the men off, that were kind of like, it set a boundary and they're like, what the fuck? Like, and so what you were saying is no one has ever pointed out to these men their male privilege, and that you become a buzzkill. So this is their response to you, is that you're a buzzkill for like not being able to take a joke. And I think that plays into all of this, of even with like approaching a woman in a bar. Like I was approached recently by a guy who was like very interested, and he asked me on a date and I just turned to him. I said, I'm just not interested. And then he went into like this sob story of how I was the first girl he had asked on a date and I just rejected him and whatever. So then it's kind of the same thing. It's like, it's the emotional labor, because they're not told that they don't get whatever they want because they have male privilege.
I mean, 100%. There's not even anything to add. It's like, yeah. And I mean, I know some lovely men. So, not to be a male apologist, but I'm just saying it is possible to start to notice these habits in yourself, for any men who are listening, right? And go, ooh. Or I could treat a woman like she's a whole human being.
Imagine.
But I think that quote, I remember now, I remember that I was talking about, and I'm going to try to be vague here, just to be really discreet, because, dialect.
Okay.
But I will say, I remember now, I was on a set, and when you're on set, a lot of the crew is just blue collar workers, 80% men, who are not in any kind of, consciousness raising circles. And what I meant about the male privilege in that case specifically is like, no one is telling them to evolve. They don't know. They don't know if they're in 2022. They don't know.
Right.
Oops. And then they have someone like me in the space. And if they're talking shit about my actors who I'm coaching, and if the shit is actually going to affect the actors, because it is, I don't know, whatever, because like word spreads. They need to, me is going to encourage them to a consciousness raising circle,
right?
And mention that some of their habits are bad and outdated,
right? Yeah. And I think this isn't like a men bashing episode. I don't feel like I think I used to be men bashing. And I
think that's quite honestly why I was surprised at that quote, because it's not the kind of language I normally use. But I do remember, I'm literally envisioning the three guys that I was referring to now that you gave me the context. And they were sweet. 2 out of 3 were dads, literally nice dudes. But underneath the surface is some biases no one told them to examine.
Yeah.
And then I was next to them because the department that they have and that I am, blah, 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 we would hang out near each other to listen for the takes. And so we got to know each other, and we like shared pictures of our kids. And then it was like, oh, well, now I'm complicit if I don't speak up. So
right. And I think that's just the thing, is it's like, as a man, like, we're not trying to tell you you're a shit human being, but can you hear us? Can you hear what we go through as women? And can you empathize or empathize? Is that a word?
Yeah.
Okay.
Empathize or empathize. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Can you empathize with
well,
us?
And also, as two white ladies, there is definitely some work that all of us are doing. And so we're also just saying,
100.
hey, are you interested in a self-improvement journey like we're all on? Because we are all taking the gamble that we can change and that the painfulness of change is super worth it. It feels great. It's a good pain. It's the pain of self-improvement. Want to join? And if they've never been invited in, feels crazy.
Right. And I love that you just pointed that out just to keep us in check too. I mean, as a white woman, I have a lot of privilege, and I need to keep that in mind. And I think like I have more privilege than my gay friends who are dealing with a ton of shit too. I mean, we're all dealing with things and we need to check ourselves to make sure that we're aware too. And I just wish that men could just see it more and understand more. And the whole hashtag not all men movement drives me insane. It's just like, duh, of course it's not all men. Just like, if you're saying not all men, you're part of the problem.
Yep. I know. I mean, I have an ongoing conversation with a friend of mine, a woman, about when we sort of keep tabs on some of the sort of male thought leaders out there, and they put out comments, white male thought leaders, I should point out, they put out comments where they've done zero work on like contextualizing their comment, who's their audience, who are they leaving out with their comment. And then those of us who are like in it doing the work cannot think about anything without it being through that lens on purpose and accidentally. Like I am well trained at this point to think from an intersectional standpoint. I want to, it matters to me, but I see these dudes churning stuff out. And my friend who's also an amazing content creator, and she's like, what must it be like to just not have to put on any kind of lens at all, to not think from anybody else's standpoint but your own? Like, wow.
Yeah.
So all we're really asking is like, think about what other people's experience might be, and B, decide that thinking about is worth your time.
Right. Yeah. I want to transition. I know we're running short on time. If we could talk a little bit about you said you work with entrepreneurs, and do you work with regular people too? Like, and I guess as entrepreneurs, or if you do coach people that aren't necessarily in the acting business or political side of things, what are some basic tips that how we can use our voice to get what we want? I know we've kind of talked about it in different fashions, but I think it just comes to play in so many different areas of our life.
I'll tell you, there's one major thing, and yes is the answer. I mean, I work with non-actors pretty exclusively right now, and my book is for non-actors. I mean, if you're an actor, lovely, welcome. I also have a background, no shame, but no, I mean, my work over the last few years really has been with people at all levels of the business world and the political world. And really, I mean, whereas I have some colleagues and friends who are speaker coaches and who help people who want to be professional speakers, I help people who don't necessarily want to be professional speakers, but who are eyeing power in a new way and pissed. I mean, that's like the perfect combo of people who find me. And that could be, I'm 22 and right out of college, and I want a better path towards power than I see the older generation having. Or it can be somebody who's in her 50s, who's about to theoretically retire from the C-suite level of some fancy corporate, environment, but is like sapped of energy and doesn't know what to do in the second half of her life. And both of those are people I've literally talked to recently, and often we're talking about actual, like, what words come out of your mouth and how do you do it for some upcoming talk. But often it's not that. It's just, how do I get better heard? How do I stop undercutting myself? How do I actually tell a story when clearly there's a setup for me to tell a story? And why do I keep dodging it? So what I'll offer for you gorgeous listeners out there is two related ideas. One is that I think at the heart of a lot of this is a little suggestion I like to drop that the public was not built for us. It's sort of an obvious comment, but like, 100 years ago, even if you were a rich white lady, you were not really allowed out of the house alone. And if you were let out of the house a few years around that time, because department stores started to be a big deal and they were hoping that they could lure women into these public-private spaces that were fancy department stores, you weren't exactly then allowed to speak on your convictions to a mixed gender audience safely 100 years ago. So think about what our grandmothers were taught, and think about what our moms were taught, and think about what we were taught. And so we shouldn't mistake this, everybody is allowed out of the house now world for being one that doesn't have long histories of generational trauma.
Mm-hmm.
So, which is to say, if it feels weird to speak in public, that's because it's actually a radical act.
Mm-hmm.
It still is in 2020.
Wow, that's so powerful.
On your own convictions without apology.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one thing. And it affects our breathing. I mean, on a literal level, because I'm at the heart of it a speech coach. We can talk about pitch and tone and tempo and volume and breath. And all those things can be affected when the space doesn't feel safe, and it doesn't have to feel unsafe because there's a scary person with a weapon. It can feel unsafe because we have no history of that space being made for us or welcoming us. And here's the other thing, and this is totally same but totally different. I think why this really is an interesting place for us all to come into our power is when we have the chance to talk about something that matters to us. And this is on a date as well as pitching in a meeting. The opportunity for authenticity comes from this. This word gets thrown around a lot and we're like, great, be myself. What version of me? How do I turn her on? What happened to her? Why am I not being her, right? Here's like my sort of simple definition of authenticity, because I think it's sort of doable, not easy, but doable. Can we talk about what matters to us like it matters to us?
Mm.
Can we talk about what we care about and sound like we care about it? Because most of us have lifelong histories of doing these two things that aren't that. Either faking that we care about something when we don't, customer service voice. Oh my God, yeah, oh, that's so interesting. Or under revealing when something really matters to us. Yeah, it was a kind of a big deal, but not really, don't worry, it's fine.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we say this matters to me, and I honor that feelings are coming up, and they are not the kind of feelings that you should be scared of. They're just me being, this is what I sound like when I care.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't turn it on all the time. This isn't some sort of like, test. But when the stakes are high, when we have the chance to pitch something that's close to our heart, when we have the chance to tell somebody, I think of like those moments we all fall in love with in Bridgerton, when the person says the thing. We can do that too, and we don't have to be an actor. We just have to decide to care out loud.
Mm-hmm.
And it's something we can practice. It's something we can notice when we're actually doing it with our favorite people and get curious. Ooh, I just did it,
Mm-hmm.
What is that? Ooh, that's what I sound like, because we all sound different when we care out loud. It's often when our weirdest and most wonderful version of ourselves comes out and we're unique. We each, this thing I said earlier about our life experiences reflected in our voice. Well, great, because we've all had a different life experience. So we all have a different voice.
It's so powerful. And I relate to that so much. I actually talking to this woman when I was getting my nails done recently, and she was like, so what do you do? And I was like, oh, I have a podcast. And she's like, girl, say that. Like, why aren't you excited about that? Why aren't you like, I have a podcast?
What I like to say is, and it's not easy peasy, but it is a fun sort of challenge, a mischievous challenge for yourself. Make your mission bigger than your mind gunk. So the mind gunk is the eras of toxicity built up on top of each other from us not being able to have a public voice. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have mind gunk. Yeah, totally. And can our mission be bigger than it?
Mm-hmm.
Here's what matters. Here's why it matters. It doesn't just matter to me. I'm making a thing for other people.
Yeah.
Again, not easy, but like easier than we sometimes think, and super worth it to try. Because the other thing is that when we do that, that is what makes us trustworthy. That is what makes people fall in love with us, not just those characters in Bridgerton.
I have 2 more quick questions. Are you okay on time?
I don't know. Let's see.
Okay. One is, I was recently told how many dead words I use in my podcast, like filler words. And I was given an exact number, and it was a high number, and it was kind of given to me in a way that, and maybe I misinterpret it, but it was kind of given to me in a way that's like, maybe your podcast isn't doing better because of this. Does that matter? And do you think that there is bias there?
Here's what I think. When we are talking about what matters to us, like it matters to us, when we have decided, when we've primed ourselves for power, when we've decided we're allowed to talk about what matters to us, like it matters to us, we tend, all of us, to use less ums and uhs and likes. The ums and uhs and likes are not independent on their own bad, and demonizing them, I think, is a huge, easy, low-hanging fruit target that is dumb and revealing of bias. Yes. And what we can take from it is, it's probably a sign, if we're overusing them, whatever. I mean, I hate judging anybody on any of this stuff, but if we are interested in, whatever, experimenting with using less, rather than thinking, stop doing these things, or thinking, I sound like an idiot if I do these, useless, mean to our poor little nervous systems, much more useful to think, what are the people who love me? How do they look at me? How do I breathe them in? My book is called Permission to Speak, because the permission side of it is just, it's what matters. It affects the speaking more than directly trying to speak, quote unquote, better.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's really powerful, and I resonate with that. And I'm actually glad I got the feedback, because it is making me more aware of it, and kind of like you said, like, what do I want? What is my vision? But yeah, thank you for that. I really appreciate it.
And also, just to clarify for anybody listening, a lot of the habits, a lot of what the linguists will call feminine markers, where we hedge, where we add in filler words, a lot of that stuff we have picked up because they work really well conversationally. When we're in group conversations and we want to make it clear, everybody's welcome to jump in on the conversation. Amanda Montell's book, Word Slut, is super great for bringing together a lot of this, like modern pop linguistics lessons that kind of make us feel like we're not the problem. I highly recommend it. But the thing is, the takeaway for me is that when we are the person on the stage, or metaphorically in the spotlight, we are not in a conversation anymore. So what is that version of us who isn't constantly saying, please feel free to jump in at any time?
Right.
She's interesting. I sometimes think, what is thought leader Samara sound like? It's like, it's not like she's not me. It's like my Sasha Fierce, right? Like what?
Right.
It's just the version of us that isn't sharing the stage for just a moment. That isn't sharing the stage.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Okay. So my last, can you do all types of accents?
Yes, but with research. This is how dialect coaching works. You find out what the job is, you figure out what story needs to get told by the sounds that come out of this person's mouth, and then you research, well, who are some native speakers who sound that way? You write down using the International Phonetic Alphabet, and kind of figure out what the music is of the accent.
Do you want to, as you share with our listeners where to find you, can you do it using an accent?
No. Here's what I like to say. I'm a better coach than I am a doer, which is why I'm bad at doing it. But it is to say that I don't get a huge amount of joy in doing that. But I do want to encourage anybody to do accent work around me, and I will not judge you, but I will offer suggestions.
Love it. Well, tell us where we can go find you. You've been so amazing.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I love this conversation, and I love that I don't normally get to have the conversation in terms of dating. And it's lovely how much is applicable, I think.
Yeah.
The main thing is I have a weekly newsletter, which if you just go to samarabay.com, you can sign up for. I call it a love letter to your voice.
Oh.
So like, so join me there. I also on Instagram do a weekly, yeah, you're nodding. I do a weekly reel on Tuesday mornings. And I'm always, my DMs are open. Let me know what you want me to do a 1-minute reel on, and I'll dedicate it to you, or I'll do it anonymously. Let me know. But I love that space. And the book is coming out in like 8 months. So I have nothing to like call to action on that, but like, just be in this world with me and let's detox our voices together.
Ugh, I'm like totally fangirling over you. I'm so glad we met. Thank you for coming on the show. And just thank you for what you brought to our listeners.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me. This was so lovely.